Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for another one of our WESC webinars. My name is Ali Ramsey. I am WESC's Communications Coordinator and Executive Assistant. So excited to see so many of you here today. I also want to give a big shout out to today's webinar sponsor, Peter Lucas Management Project Management. We are so appreciative of Peter Lucas. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's webinar. And our topic today is a really exciting one. Our topic today is the alchemy of confidence from imposter to empowered, and is presented by Dr. Jessica Metcalfe of the Alchemist Mind. So if you have any questions for Jessica as we go through the presentation, feel free to put them into the Q&A box. So there is a Q&A box and there's also a regular chat box. Try to put your questions in the Q&A box. But please go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from into the regular chat box. And as always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You'll receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I will pass it on over to Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I am so excited to be here with you lovely ladies today. So I'm going to start to share my screen. So let's pop that up. Okay. Confidence is a finicky thing. It can come and go. It can be fleeting. We could feel like we're the most powerful women ever. And yet at times, it can feel as we have no confidence at all. And that's what I want to talk to you today. I want to talk to you about how do we work through when we feel like an imposter or self-doubt starts to pop up. And so just as Ali had said, pop into the chat box. Where are you from? Who we're hanging out with today? And I want you guys to utilize the conversation within the chat and the Q&A as much as possible. So before we start to get into what today is going to be all about, I want you lovely ladies to be able to take a deep breath in with me. So in through the nose and out through the mouth. So you likely signed up today because you read a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. And that means then you likely have an intention of why you want to be here today. So jot it down. Say it in your mind, whatever you want to do. I want you to create an intention for the next hour, okay? So take 15 seconds. What is that intention for today? Awesome. So today we have a flow. And I want to go through exactly how you can expect today's next hour to unfold. I want you to grab a piece of paper and a pen because I want you to actively be taking notes. Anything you want to screenshot from today's presentation, please do so. So then that way you can take it and continue to apply it even after you leave here today. Okay. I want you to actively take part in today's lecture or webinar. And with that, we're going to utilize the chat feature. So I'm going to be asking some important questions and we're going to create this vulnerable space because we know we've all experienced some of these things. So whether it's a pen and paper or your iPad or your computer, make sure you're taking notes throughout. And then today we're going to be talking about everything imposter syndrome related. So let me share a little bit about who I am. Well, I went to the University of Western Ontario, where I completed my undergraduate degree and I started my master's. During those years, I had 3 life-defining moments. The first one was my 15-year-old cousin committed suicide because she was being bullied at school. My mom, who was already bipolar, experienced a traumatic brain injury, developed psychosis, and couldn't remember who I was. And lastly, I was diagnosed with a learning disability at the age of 20. So I had to learn how to learn all over again. Now, at that time, I wanted to become a dentist, and that's all I ever wanted. So I put my horse blinders on and I decided that that's what I was going to be. But I thought it was so far out there because of those life-defining moments. Because of that learning disability, I thought it wasn't going to happen. And then one school, one interview, and Boston University gave me that opportunity. I returned home, which is Toronto at the time, and I completed a hospital residency program because I fell in love with treating medically compromised and special needs patients. From there, I became a dentist at a cancer center, an education director for the program, and was a clinical researcher. Now, during that time, I was kind of going through some things, but didn't realize what was happening. Now, today, I'm also an executive coach where I coach ambitious women, just like you sitting in front of your screen today, on how to build up that confidence. Now, outside of work, I was heavily involved in organized dentistry and in women's organizations. Why? Because education is my passion. Okay, so let me share a little bit of fun facts about myself because I just gave you this CV. Some fun facts: I used to own a rock and roll music school. I read a lot. I train jujitsu because it's a great way to get my frustrations out. I get to beat up people in a controlled manner. And I love the outdoors, which is why 7 months ago, I decided to move across the country, because if I was going to be teaching women and coaching women how to live their best life and believe in themselves, I needed to step into that as well. And so I moved across the country to British Columbia, and I am now on Vancouver Island. Now, when I talk about my CV and I share some of my extracurriculars, it looks good on paper. And yet sometimes I too feel like an imposter. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to share what I was experiencing behind the burnout and talk about ways on how to change that self-doubt, the fear of failure, and ultimately preventing burnout. So when you look at the photo on your screen, it looks like I'm having the best time of my life. And yet, a few years ago, that same photo was when I was diagnosed with my third burnout, clinical depression, and a generalized anxiety disorder. What was happening behind the smile is that I was full of self-doubt and the fear of failure, fear that I couldn't ask for help, and fear of the success because of the responsibilities that then would come with it. So I feared that I would be found out and that I wasn't strong enough. So one of the questions I started to ask was, why as ambitious women do we experience what we experience? And that very naturally led me down this research rabbit hole where I ended up founding the Alchemist Academy, ultimately the Alchemist Mind. So why do I do what I do? Why are we sitting here today? Because I want to encourage these uncomfortable conversations about doubt, about fear of failure, about mistakes that can happen. I want to be able to create these safe spaces so we can build communities, not that we're competing against each other, but that we're hoisting each other up into the next stratosphere. And I want to be able to empower the badass women who sit in front of me today. So you're in the right room if you underestimate your abilities, you explain away your success, you never feel like you're good enough, you have a to-do list that is never ending, that you experience self-doubt that could be both crippling and keep you stuck. I want to share with you, you may not be in the right room if you don't believe in making these lasting changes, because that's what we're going to be doing today. If you don't want to ask yourself the hard questions, if you don't want to be vulnerable, because that's what we're going to be doing today, we're creating that safe space. And this isn't the right place if you're looking for a quick fix, because there is no magic pill. But what I can tell you is when you slowly start to make changes, you can then implement them and see your own progress almost at that point where you didn't even realize that confidence within you existed. So let's get ready. So let's go back to get that pen and paper, your iPad, your phone, and your computer, and we're going to start to launch in. And the way that I want to start is I want to tell you a little bit about a story about one of my clients who names have been changed for confidentiality reasons. Her name is June, and June is an extremely hard worker. She works morning, noon, and night. She has 2 full-time jobs, being a mom and being a business owner. June puts herself out there, is organized, has that to-do list. She knows work is hard, but at times she realizes the joy that she gets from it. And just like me with that smile plastered across my face, everyone else around her says she's cheerful and joyful and happy and must be living her best life. And yet, work feels harder. Life feels even harder. June doesn't believe in herself. She thinks she's failing not just her expectations, but living up to her partner's expectations, to her employer's expectations, and to her own clients. And so she feels stuck. And she doesn't know what to do in order to make those changes. So that feeling of overwhelm consumes her. And so when I started to work with June, we started on something small. We started to identify, where did that self-doubt come from? Why does it exist? And what is it called? Because when you can label something, you can start to understand why you experience it. And what June is experiencing is imposter phenomenon. Imposter phenomenon is self-doubt coupled with the feeling of being found out. So it's not self-doubt on its own. Self-doubt is in fact an emotion that at times can be good. Why? Because it's getting us outside of our comfort zone. Self-doubt is an indication that informs us we in fact care. So it helps us question if what we're doing is the right thing. But when it's coupled with that feeling that you're going to be found out, that you feel like a fraud, then it's experiencing imposter phenomenon. This can ultimately lead to an increased anxiousness, professional paralysis, never feeling good enough, and never being able to reach your fullest potential. So you may have heard the term imposter syndrome, but today we're actually going to be staying away from the term imposter syndrome because it's not a syndrome. There's nothing wrong with you. Okay. So when I started down this rabbit hole of research, I reached out to the 2 individuals who coined the term, Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes. And what they said is that we should actually still be calling it a phenomenon because it's a personal experience to each one of us, which means we're going to be experiencing it very differently. A phenomenon is a true experience. And that is the first thing I want you to know is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Okay. So the first set of questions I would like you to start to think about. Do you ever feel like your accomplishments are because of luck, chance, appearance, or connection? Are you worried you're going to be exposed as a fraud? Do you think people around you are smarter, work harder, or do a better job than you? Do you find yourself terrified to make mistakes or that you need to be perfect? I remember when I stumbled along these questions, I hit a resounding yes. So I want you to pop in the chat right now. Did you answer yes to one, to all of them, to a couple of them? Do they relate to you? So if they relate, pop in the word yes. Can you relate to these questions? Can you relate to what I've been talking about so far? Do you notice that inner voice, something that sits in the back of your mind? Yeah. Look at all these yeses coming in. Yeah. Yes times 4, Claire. Yes. So what is going on? Well, there's this thought pattern that's starting to exist. It's not that you think you've never accomplished something, right? You see your degrees, you see the business that you've built, you've seen your growth. It's that you just don't believe it. That feeling that can get stuck either in your throat, in your chest, in the pit of your stomach, where you question yourself the entire time. So I know what some of you are saying. Well, you know what, this inner voice, this actually allows me to set high standards and it pushes me. So it makes me work hard. It motivates me and it keeps me humble. And this is what I used to say to myself. Well, there's no way that this is bad, this inner voice that I'm experiencing, because I've gotten to where I am today. But this is the myth that we keep on telling ourselves, because realistically, it's, I can't live up to my standards. I don't know when to stop working. And I only know how to belittle and put myself down. That inner voice at times can be pretty mean. And it can be full of believable lies. So now it's starting to change how we choose to speak to ourselves, so we can then change how we choose to see ourselves. So let's talk about, okay, well, where did this imposter belief originate from? So there's two parts of it. Where did it come from? It's the age-old question of nature versus nurture. So the first part is family dynamics or family patterns. So you may have grown up in a family where there was a big emphasis, or it was highly valued to be intelligent. So getting those straight A's, doing extremely well. On the opposite side, you may have experienced a troubled or traumatic childhood. And so that voice slowly started to get programmed early on. So this voice didn't just all of a sudden come out of nowhere. Now, the reason why I share this is not to play the blame game. It's to give you the information so then you can start to understand, okay, well, where did this voice actually come from? The second is social conditioning, specifically for women. We're taught to criticize ourselves. We're taught to minimize our own ambitions. Women actually show up in a room and will try to gauge it by asking more questions instead of giving statements, because we try to gauge the room because we don't necessarily want to step on toes. When we start to criticize ourselves, we then automatically think we have to justify ourselves as well. It's like receiving a compliment. We have a hard time accepting it and saying thank you. Usually what ends up happening is we have to justify why that person said thank you to us. A thank you is more than enough. And lastly, success and likability are negatively correlated for women and yet positively correlated for men. So a research project was done out of Harvard Business School. And what they did was they gave the exact same business entrepreneur on how this person got to where they are, which is by using their networks and building their business. The only difference between the two, they gave to two different classes. The difference between the two is they gave one person the name of Heidi and one person the name of Howard. And what they noticed is when the name was given Heidi, the group looked upon them negatively, didn't think that this person was likable. Essentially, and this is where it goes back to, you can be confident, but you can't be a bitch. So we now have this mind trap that we sit in, which is cognitive dissonance, where we're trying to unravel two opposing thoughts that are trying to occur in our mind at the exact same time. When that class was given the name Howard, they looked at him as being, oh yeah, that's totally fine. I want to go golfing with him. So already we have these societal expectations along with our family dynamics, and add in now our internal voice. No wonder we start to experience that self-doubt and feel like a fraud. So I want to talk about the 5 different imposter types as described by Dr. Valerie Young. So there's the perfectionist who aims for 100% all the time. There's the natural genius where they think everything needs to come easily. The expert, whereas you expect to know everything. And then the lone wolf is where you need to do everything on your own. And the last one is the super, which is the perfectionist on overdrive. Okay, so let's get into each specific one of them. Okay, the perfectionist looks at how something is done. This individual must receive 100 out of 100. I'm not talking about a test. I'm talking about any program that you put on, any presentation you give. If you're attending an event for your kids' school and you're helping volunteering, everything must be at that 100%, which means when you get 99% on it and you look back at it, you actually only see the 1% that didn't go well. You discount the 99% and you tell yourself, well, it wasn't actually good enough and I should have done better. So instead of looking for the drive to be successful, there's a drive for perfection for the fear of failure. So now we're in a negative mindset right from the get-go. Then there's the natural genius, and you may hear some crunching. It's my dog that's underneath my desk right now. So if you do hear some crunching, it's her with her toy. So the natural genius is how and when something is done. This individual measures it by ease and speed, and which means it needs to come fast and you need to be able to pick it up quickly. So if you don't get it on the first try, you tend to give up. You tend to push it away and think, well, it's not something that's a strength and there's no way that I can learn this. Instead of recognizing that sometimes it takes more than a first attempt, it takes a second and a third and a fourth, we then consider it a sign of failure. And so the natural genius avoids taking risks, avoids trying to push their boundary to get out into that uncomfortable zone to help them with their growth. The expert is what and how much you know or can do. So it's the knowledge version of the perfectionist. So you then put an enormous amount of pressure on yourself to know everything. And you start to think that, well, if you miss something or don't know something, you should have actually already known it. So you condemn yourself for not knowing everything, even in the process of learning, even in the process of growing. This individual can get hung up on the information stage. This is where you're doing research after research or taking course after course, thinking that the next course, the next letter or degree is going to then make you that expert. But that keeps you stuck on or in the research and learning phase, instead of actually putting yourself out there with the information that you already know. Then there's the lone wolf. The lone wolf looks at who completes the task. Usually this individual has hyper independence and has a hard time being able to ask for help. When you do ask for help, you may even consider it a sign of weakness. If you're asking and you try to tell yourself, well, it's because I'm learning, you then say, well, I should have already known this already. And so you consider it another sign of weakness. The lone wolf will struggle until they are overworked to the brim. And so even if you think asking for help would help you, you still avoid thinking, I should be the one to do it on my own. The last one is the super. The super is the perfectionist on overdrive. This individual looks at how many roles you take on. Now, the difference between the perfectionist and the super is that now everything overflows into your life. You now need to be the perfect mom, the perfect partner, the perfect daughter, the perfect yogi, the perfect leader. And if we were at the beginning of the pandemic, likely the perfect baker because everyone was trying sourdough recipes, the perfect athlete. When all of a sudden, our hobbies are no longer fun, when our hobbies, our personal life starts to take on that perfectionist tendency, we have a hard time being able to recoup, to re-energize, to rest, and to ultimately play. So now I want to use the chat. Which imposter type did you relate to? Did you relate to more than one? Which ones did you relate to? So pop that into the chat right now. Which ones could you relate to? More than one. Lone wolf. Here we go. Okay. All of them. All of them. Yeah. A little bit of everything, pretty much all of them, some more specific. Okay. Now, the reason why I ask which imposter type and why it's important to know is to create awareness. When you know certain imposter types are starting to rear its head, you can now start to slowly make changes. You can recognize that, oh, I'm going through and totally burning myself out because I'm not asking for help. Okay, what is it within my realm that I'm doing right now that I can start to ask for help? Is there something that I can now give to someone else to do that they can still report back to me, but that I can then give to them to do? So it's taking one thing off my plate. If it's the expert or the natural genius, it's now recognizing, okay, have I researched enough? Okay, I'm going to give myself 2 days, a week to do the research. I'm just giving out arbitrary numbers on this specific next project. After that point in time, whatever research I have, that's what I'm going to use. And I need to start getting into how to put things out there. The reason why this is important, especially when we start to create timelines around that, is then that way months, years don't go by and you don't push yourself to the point where you're happy with that next goal. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through the imposter cycle. So then that way you can create checkpoints along the way. So the imposter cycle usually starts with that initial thought of, I don't know, I can't do this, I shouldn't do this, there's someone better out there to do it. That usually comes up when you're given a challenge, an obstacle, or you're in a transitional phase, which means you could be promoted or you could be leaving one job and going to the next one. So we've established what the thought is. Okay, that thought creates that uncomfortable feeling inside of us. That uncomfortable feeling is a form of anxiety. Now we're going to label that as anxiety for this, but you can label it as frustration, as anger, as sadness, whatever emotion that is in association with it, that then responds inside the body. This is your body's reaction, okay? That uncomfortableness that comes up usually then comes with activating that flight or fight response within us. That has increased adrenaline, your heart starts to race, you may start to sweat, and you may even get that creeping sense or dread in your stomach. So the butterfly feelings as well. So that initial thought, the I don't knows, I shouldn't, with any given challenge, obstacle, or something new, starts to create that uncomfortable feeling inside of us. And that uncomfortable feeling can activate more of that self-doubt. That turns on your inner critic. And your inner critic is that inner voice that is full of believable lies. Your inner critic can be mean. Your inner critic can shout nonsense at times. Your inner critic can keep you stuck. Just as if we wear multiple hats during the day. So whether you're a boss, a team member, a mom, a partner, you use a different voice to speak with all of those individuals. So you're wearing multiple hats during the day. You have the same thing that occurs when you're speaking to yourself or if you're speaking to others. So you not only have an inner critic, you may have an inner cheerleader, you may have another voice that helps motivate you or that can keep you sad. So the inner critic that starts to come through is that self-doubt and that fear of failure. So when that inner critic starts to pop through, usually what we end up saying to ourselves, and you can change this into the terminology or the vocabulary that you use, is I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be here. I shouldn't be the one to do this. Or you might catch yourself saying, I'm an imposter. Now, during that time, if you connected with those imposter types, the next step after that self-doubt and the fear of failure is where our drive for perfection starts to kick in. When we drive to perfection, we do one of two things. The first one is we either avoid, so procrastinate, and the second is the potential of overworking. Now, ultimately, when you experience imposter phenomenon, you're always going to be successful. This is the qualm that comes with experiencing the imposter cycle, is that you are always going to be successful. But here's the thing, because you overworked, you look back at it and you think that you can't do it again. You can't repeat the same with the same levels of energy. And one of the reasons why you avoided or procrastinated isn't because you're a procrastinator. It's because you didn't want to feel that uncomfortableness that came with starting something new. Okay, so we reached our success. You may have overworked or avoided based on your work style, ultimately for the reason that you were driving for perfection. Now, you were successful each and every single time. How long did that feeling last? So I want you to think about a moment in time right now, and I want you to question, how long did that feeling, whether it was joy, happiness, a feeling of accomplishment, how long did that feeling last? So I want you to pop that into the chat. Was it seconds, minutes, days, a week? How long does that feeling of success usually last when you've accomplished one of your goals, projects, or even crossed something off that to-do list? A day? Minutes? Yeah. Very briefly. Yeah. Half a day, if I'm lucky. I like that. Yeah. Minutes? Yeah. We don't give ourselves the opportunity to be able to sit in that success. When it only lasts minutes, a half a day, or even a day, we've already moved on to the next thing, which means we weren't able to process what happened prior to that success. All we automatically said, and Jackie just made a point of it, is that it fades. So we have to be able to hold on to it before we then move on to the next task, before we're then challenging ourselves with the next goal. Now, one prominent time in my life that I noticed when I started to understand, okay, how is the imposter cycle affecting me? And I started to reflect back. And I asked myself this question. I remember day of graduation in dental school. And I remember walking into the auditorium and taking my place in alphabetical order. And during that time, our names were starting to get called up, and I'm standing in line getting ready to go on stage. And I'm so nervous. And I start to get to stage, I see the stairs, and the thoughts that start to go through my head were, did I wear the right shoes? Will I be the one who trips on stage? Will I shake the dean's hand and grab the degree right? I then remember sitting in the chair afterwards, gripping my degree so tightly. I actually don't remember walking across the stage. I do, however, remember thinking, now what? I discounted the last 11 years in 2 words. Now what? I was already on to whether I was going to be a good dentist. Was my residency program going to be good enough? Should I become an associate? Should I own multiple offices? but I don't just want to do dentistry. So what other professions can I consider as well? I was already on to the next thing. That was a huge one for me. And I discounted it in 2 words. It lasted seconds. And a part of the imposter cycle is when we discount our success. And we discount it without knowing by not giving ourselves the opportunity to embrace it in those moments. So we discount our success, whether it is not living in the feeling for a bit, or explaining it away, or just thinking that it wasn't really that good. So let's take a look at that overwork and avoid component again. We're actually going to go through each one of these so then you guys can create checkpoints along the way. Okay. So we're going to reframe. So now instead of it being an imposter cycle, we're going to start to change it to an empowered cycle. So this is how we go from imposter to empowered. Now, through the next few slides, I'm going to give you those checkpoints for you to then apply when you're in a new obstacle, in a new challenge, being able to be in that transition. But I want you to know, just as we created self-awareness around which imposter type you noticed you connected with, I don't want you to get angry at yourself. Because when we start to create self-awareness around what we're doing, we then try to catch ourselves and think, oh, I already worked through that. How come it's coming up again? Well, you got to where you are today and it has helped. So I want you to thank that voice, but it doesn't have to be the only voice that propels you into the stratosphere of your next challenges. So let's walk through the empowered cycle. So that initial question, whether it is, I don't know, it is, I shouldn't be the one to do this. I can't do this. There's someone else better. I'm not worthy enough for it. Okay. That's when it starts to activate that uncomfortable feeling inside of us. So usually that flight or fight response. And what I want you to do is I want you to sit in that uncomfortableness. And we're going to call it body talk. I want you to jot down the emotion that you're experiencing and describe what that uncomfortable feeling is. So you have to be specific with it. So initially, I had given some suggestions around, you notice your heart start to race, butterflies in your stomach, a lump in your throat. Some of you may even start to develop headaches or notice muscle aches. I want you to pay attention to how that initial self-doubt can present itself for you. Then I want you to take a look at what are the words you're choosing to use. This is when you're going to pay attention and use unbiased self-talk. This is when you start to be specific with the words that you're using to combat what the inner critic is saying. So you're going to question yourself. One of the reasons why we start to doubt is we allow our brain to kind of process what's happening and it starts to stumble. It starts with a snowball of a whole bunch of questions, but then it steamrolls into an avalanche. And what our mind is trying to do in the moment is trying to find answers, but we just continually follow it with question after question after question until we feel overwhelmed. So we're going to start to answer what those questions are. So going back as a reminder, these are what we can start to talk to ourselves about, saying, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be here. I shouldn't be the one to do this, or I'm an imposter. Let's use this as an example as you're getting ready for a project or a presentation, okay? You can start to be specific depending on what challenge is in front of you. You just need to change the questions to what those questions that are coming through are saying to you. So questions around a new project or giving a presentation. What if I'm not prepared? What if I don't have the answer? What if I fumble over my words? What if someone doesn't like it? Now, usually the question of what if someone doesn't like it And this is something I had to dig deep to try to figure out, well, what was it that I was actually asking myself? It's, what if someone doesn't like me? Now, the thing is that not everyone's going to like us. And so what I usually say to my clients when we start to kind of get stuck in this component is I ask them, do you like everyone that you meet? And usually the answer is no. I said, so why would you think the reverse about yourself? Right? When we separate us that we're not going to be friends with everyone, yes, we have coworkers and yes, we need to be cordial, but you don't necessarily have to like everyone, which means that not everyone's going to like you. And that's okay. That is totally fine. Okay. So now when we start to process and we start to answer the questions, we want to really get specific with our answers. So what if I'm not prepared? What's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, you may feel uncomfortable in that moment, but you can then process and maybe find the answers. If you can remind yourself that you have in fact prepared, whether you avoided it initially or overworked, you know you prepared for the presentation and the project. So it's reminding yourself that you did in fact prepare. What if I don't have the answer? So this one usually came up, especially when it came to presentations, is that, well, what if I don't have the answer? The person's going to think I'm stupid. But sometimes we don't have all the information to be able to give that answer. So one way to think about this and one way to answer this question is, well, what if I don't have the answer? Can you ask people in the audience if anyone else has the answer? Yep, that's definitely a possibility. Can you say, you know what, I don't have the answer right now, but that's a great question. Can I get back to you at such and such date and time? It takes the pressure off thinking that you need to have everything ready for right now, because that keeps you stuck in the research phase. Okay, what if I fumble over my words? This one was a big one for me because I always found with larger audiences, because I initially started out speaking on how to treat cancer patients from the general dentist perspective. And there's always someone in the audience who tries to stump you. And so usually what I notice is that that's when I was fumbling over my words. And so I would take a moment, take a deep breath, recollect my thoughts, and then start to explain again. Now, if I fumbled over my words, usually one of two things would happen. Someone in the audience would catch me and someone would be nice enough to say, hey, did you mean this? And I would be like, oh, you know what? We've got to change that around. That's not what I actually meant. The other is that I catch myself when I fumble and then I correct it in that moment as well. Now, when we look at what if someone doesn't like it, everyone's preference is still going to be different. And this is when we take a look at perfection. Perfection is a perspective. Your perfection and my perfection are not the same thing. And that is what we need to be aware of, is to start to create expectations and realistic expectations around our goals, around our challenges, instead of getting stuck in what perfectionism is. Okay, so now we've talked about, as we start to process through, when we go through and understand how we choose to speak to ourselves and pay attention to the way that our body is now reacting, that allows us to skip over the drive for perfection and overwork. And it closes the circle even more. Now, I know what you're thinking is that how am I just going to skip over these three massive things? Okay. The drive for perfection, we just talked about. Setting expectations. When you set expectations and setting realistic expectations, you can then go back and evaluate and figure out, did they meet your expectation? Okay. When we look at overworking or avoiding, at that point in time, that's when we're setting time limits or time frames. If you're overworking, it's setting a designated amount of time. And after that is done, it's time to move on. When you start to set those checkpoints into your calendar, you're able to then implement and also honor them. And when you do that, it then starts to free up time with your family for self-care and to take on maybe other hobbies that you've been wanting to do for a while. Let's look at avoiding or procrastination. When you avoid, one of the main reasons is that because you feel uncomfortable, which we now have said we're going to be able to understand why certain body reactions come up, and we're going to do that through body talk, we can start to pay attention and say, okay, instead of putting this off, I'm going to schedule it in. And when we schedule it in, whether it's, you know what, I'm going to do it right now, it fits into my schedule, it's not bumping anything else, then I'm going to do it right now. Or when we actually plan it into our schedule, it takes the pressure off of our mind from a subconscious level. When we actually plan it into our days or into our week, what ends up happening is that we're not stuck thinking about it the entire time leading up to that point. We're not stuck spinning those wheels thinking, oh, I should do that now. Maybe I should do it later, but I just don't feel it. Oh, I know what it's going to happen. And we're having this constant internal battle with ourselves. But if you set a specific date and time on when you're going to take on that challenge, it allows the rest of you to be able to take a break. So, drive for perfection is setting realistic expectations. Overworking and avoiding is setting timelines. And then in success, this is when we start to acknowledge and give ourselves permission to kind of own our own success. So when we own our own success, what ends up happening? Well, we learn from challenges. We have a sense of satisfaction and personal accomplishment, and it helps us build our self-esteem that ultimately correlates with our confidence. This allows you to build internal validation. And this is one of my favorite things to do with my clients. When I start with a new client, this is the first thing that we do. We create a positive investment container. And this could be positive or neutral because we know not everything can be happy or positive or sunshine all the time. Not everything's sunshine and rainbows. There are days that are going to be crap, and we can own those days as well. But you are creating a rainy day fund of the great things that you've accomplished in life. And I've started that by giving you the first worksheet, which is what I like to call brain training exercises, for you to start to build that internal validation. The reason why this is important is because when we acknowledge our successes, we can now take that information into our future challenge or obstacle and recognize that not only are skills transferable, but that you have the confidence to be able to take this on now. It is totally within you. There is a stat that when women apply for jobs and they see what's on the job description, women will only apply to jobs if they are 110% qualified. Men will apply for jobs if they are 60 to 70% qualified. I want you to own your successes because I want you to believe in yourself enough to be able to shoot so high for that next goal. Okay, so now we bring the circle, we shrink it down. Remember, you're always going to be successful. I want you to own that. So the next time something happens, instead of jumping to the, I don't know, I can't do this, I shouldn't be the one to do this, I want you to say, maybe I do know. The words that you choose to use matter and have meaning. And when you choose to speak to yourself in a negative way, you hear it just as loud as if you're having a conversation with someone, which means that volume is really loud. So maybe I do know, which then doesn't fully activate your flight or fight response, which means it doesn't feel as uncomfortable. And now you have the understanding that I'm capable. And you start to go through your process of unbiased body talk, unbiased self-talk, creating realistic expectations, setting time frames or time limits, and then owning your success. So what are the next steps? How do you put this all into action? I want you to start small. I don't expect you to conquer the entire cycle all in one go. But if you started today by recognizing an imposter type and how that can present on either a daily basis, a weekly basis, or with anything new, you can slowly start to make those changes. When you start small, then it doesn't feel overwhelmed like you can't do something. So pick something that you really resonated with today and start there. And do it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until you master that skill. Then when you have, add on the next checkpoint. So it doesn't have to happen right away. In order to keep these steps in action, it's always great to have a community of support like today or an accountability buddy. This is someone who I actually have multiple accountability partners for different components of my life, and I just met with mine 3 hours ago. That support allows you to keep you in check. This allows you to make sure that on maybe weeks that you don't feel the greatest, it's okay. Because the last thing that I didn't talk about is as we start to go through and process and own our success, it's building self-compassion along the way. That is one of the hardest things to do. And the last is if you've started small, you found your accountability partner, but you're noticing that you need that little bit of extra help, engage a coach. It doesn't have to be me, it can be someone else. So what I'm going to have Ali do right now is pop into the chat. I have my next group coaching starting in June. And so I'm taking a wait list right now. If you resonated with me in today's seminar, and it may not be with me, but you would like to engage with another coach as well, please do so. But if you really connected with me and you were thinking, you know what, I think Jess would be a great coach for me to be able to process what I'm going through, along with self-doubt, fear, failure, and burnout, I'm more than happy to help you out. So the link's in there. Please sign up, join the waitlist. I want to leave you with mental fitness is just as important as physical fitness. When we go to the gym on a regular basis or at home workouts, you slowly start to see your muscles change over time. And there's before and after photos, okay? With mental fitness, you don't necessarily see the changes because we can't just open up our brain and go in there and kind of move around. But you're going to feel it. You're going to feel the difference. And it may not happen a day, a month, or even a couple months from now, but you're going to notice a change when you realize it's just as important to take care of you, to train your brain, as it is to take care of everyone else around you and the rest of your body. So I want to thank you so much for spending an hour of your lunch with me. My contact information is on the slide. I'm more than happy to, we've got 4 minutes if we're on a hard stop. And I would love to answer any questions if they come up. And I'm in the Q&A box right now. Nothing came up. So if there's anything that is burning bright right now that you would like to share with me, please do so. Pop it into the chat. And you are so very welcome. I'm so happy to have been here. You are so welcome. Did you say you'd be sending out a recording as well? Yes. So a recording has been done. That will be coming from Ali.
Yes, we will have a recording up on our website by the end of the day, and tomorrow you will receive an email with the link to the recording as well. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. If not, I'm sure Jessica would be happy to touch base with you after this webinar as well. So thank you so much, Jessica. That was super informative. I really appreciate it. We had some really great engagement in the chat. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, everybody, this will be on demand on our website by the end of the day. So do look out for that. Our next webinar is coming up next week. It's our virtual business growth luncheon, and it's on tax preparation for small businesses on February 23rd. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, please do so. And once again, look out for the recording on our website by the end of the day. Bye, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.